Hi everyone, and welcome, Bran. Welcome back to our fireside chat with CFOs and finance leaders. And today I'm happy to have Bran with us today. Bran is a seasoned FP&A expert, CFO, and has been leading different finance teams across while over multiple decades. So I'm very excited to hear what Bran's Dream AI agent looks like. Welcome, Brian. Anything that you want to kickstart with?
No, I just thank you for the invitation. No, just wonderful to be back. The only thing that I would share is that I recently just came back from Southeast Asia. So I was in Bahrain and Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore. And again, what is fascinating to me is just the universal challenges that the Office of Finance is facing. So whether it's in Bahrain, which I had never been to before, so that was, I'm sorry, not Bahrain, my mistake, Brunei, had never been to before, or whether we're in Dubai or whether we're in London, what we're talking about today is truly universal, and I think that's why it resonates so much with the audience to hear what's going on, because it's not a nationalistic or a regional challenge that people have. It's truly universal.
So what are you hearing from all the folks that you have met so far?
There's a lot of buzz about AI and technology, and I think there's a gap, in all honesty, between understanding, well, two things. One is, I think people need to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about things like RPA versus Gen AI
Mm.
versus agentic. And there's a little bit of it can do everything. And so I think there's kind of like the overpromise. And then I'd say the third point is what they're really keen on is how do I bring what's tangible? Like what can I get
Mm.
done today? And so, they're hearing on one side that, AI is going to take over the world. On the other hand, they're like, how do I apply that today? So I think one of the critical roles that we can play is help people understand what is the art of the possible, and certainly still being aspirational to like where we're heading to, because we certainly can talk about like agentic is one of those things where, I think, to reference Gartner, like last year nothing was done in agentic, and
Mm.
by 2030, 15% of the Office of Finance will be autonomous. And
Mm.
so it's kind of hard to grasp with that kind of change. I think the other piece too is just the velocity, right? Is that things are changing so fast. And, for the Office of Finance specifically, because we are small c conservatives, how can we bring it in? What's manageable? And so I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from folks. They want to take that step, but there's a concern about what it is. Security is obviously a huge. We hear about the challenges about with Gen if you're going out, but how
Yeah.
different that is from being agentic. And so I think that's a big piece of what I keep hearing. So whether it's being in Boston next month, I'll be in Thailand and back in Malaysia the following month. But that's what people are trying to do, is how can we implement something that is going to be tangible
Mhm.
and sets the groundwork. The term I use is future proofing the Office of Finance, is the
Mm.
idea of how do we build something today that not only does it solve the problem for today, but
Mm.
sets me up to thrive going forward.
Yeah, that's I agree, and it's very interesting you brought up. So there were two things that you brought up that I also encountered very recently. So the first one was RPA versus Gen AI and agentic AI. Um, I think late last week we were presenting in front of a closed door jury, and we had fairly seasoned professionals in the room, and we got that question. Like then this was me and my co-founder, and we were like this is a repeated question where as someone who's building like cool whatever finance AI, it's something you want to have top of mind because your user, who's the CFO or the CFO's office, needs to understand clearly how this is different or how the future is different. So whether it's current tools or future tools. And the second one is security. So that's like, I think it's not only security, there's also a notion of responsible AI. So like we are talking about Dream AI agent and all of that, but how do I make sure that that agent, even if it's very useful, is not doing wrong things?
Right.
So from a
Going rogue.
yeah. So going rogue is still, I think, uh, okay, because in the sense that you will assume that it'll give you garbage,
Yeah.
or it will, like, it won't hurt you. What if it becomes an adversary? What do I do there? So it's very, very critical. We don't that doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah,
Just because and again, it's a little bit, and again,
yeah,
not ever knocking any other part of the business, but the financial information can be, very,
absolutely,
very sensitive. And the idea
yeah,
of just opening that up to, you know, we talk about the fact that, well, you have a human doing it today.
hmm,
And I think, and I think you and I have shared some of the studies that we've seen is like, but AI doesn't have a moral compass, right?
yeah,
Is it, it doesn't, sometimes it may not necessarily understand the sensitivity of the data that it's working with. And again,
yeah,
this is, from the CFO's perspective, is like, where again, trying to overcome that, because obviously it can be done, but it's just that,
hmm,
hey, I know if Bob sees that information, knows, oh wait, that I shouldn't be looking at that. Whereas,
hmm.
how does an agent learn that? And part of it is, again, and so there's always the defense of, well, if I, kind of being a doctor, do no harm, right? So if I, I might be behind the curve from a technology standpoint,
Yeah.
but that's better than hurting the patient.
Absolutely, yeah. So maybe coming back to where you are, before we get into what your AI agent or what your dream AI agent looks like, I want to understand a little bit better what are your daily tasks as a
Sure.
finance leader or a CFO. Yeah.
So, I mean, very broadly, I mean, you're never going to get away from just financial reports, right? What's going on
Hmm,
just in your core financial accounting, like what's happening with the P&L and on the balance sheet, income statement, but then also understanding, what is going on with cash flow. And of course, we're always living in uncertain times, but um, we're in really uncertain times right now. And the term that I use is VUCA, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And
hmm,
I think it's safe to say we're at a 6-month high right now on VUCA. And so just the criticality of cash, of working capital, of liquidity,
hmm,
certainly, having built out, ideally a good dashboard with my KPIs. So just to see where things are trending, what's going on with the budget, what's happening with our financial plans. The other two areas, I think, you again, it once you kind of get up to the CFO level, is like risk assessment, right? What's
hmm,
going on? What are the threats that are out there? But I look at it much more from an R&O perspective, so risk and opportunity. And it's like, yeah, so what are the risks that are out there? But what are some new opportunities? So constantly monitoring that. And then, like, we're just gonna never get away from compliance, right? And at the end of the day, that's where, certainly in, I obviously I'm US centric, but we've had legal changes. So I mean, from a
hmm.
compliance and account and from an accounting perspective, that has become so much more critical, obviously, over the last 20 years. But that's kind of how the day just starts, right? That's kind of the first morning, like, what if any burning platforms do we have? But also, that, and staff is looking at that also. But how does that then, of course, if you take all those, I think that's
Hmm.
six components, how does that flow up into the strategy of what we're trying to do? Because again, at the end of the day, that's what the CFO is trying to manage too, is keeping the organization from a strategic standpoint moving in the direction that it wants to be, obviously focused from the financial component.
So essentially, all these metrics across all horizontal finance, what do you say, processes, um, and laid out ideally as reports or dashboards is what you would be doing every day. But how often do you end up making those reports, or how often do you end up making, let's say, Excel sheets, or consuming Excel sheets and trying to get insights from them, uh, or is that mostly delegated out to teams?
That's mostly, yeah. I mean, from truly sitting at the office of the CFO, that's pretty much delegated out. I'd actually go the other way in the sense.
Okay.
that you should not have your CFO involved with Excel spreadsheets. And I've worked with people and we love it, right? Because again, those of us of a certain vintage, that's what we grew up on and we love it. And it's sometimes, I mean, I've worked with other peers where it's really hard to take that away from them. They want to do the work because they love it. And it's trying to explain to them kind of the old classic, it's just not a good allocation of resources.
Hmm.
Like that, it's kind of like, and I'll really, really date myself, but it's the idea that, the CFO, can type the fastest. They're the greatest, word processor you have. Yeah, but you shouldn't have them writing documents, right? Even though they're the best, right? So they can even be the best Excel person that you have on your team, but that's
Mhm.
not how you should be using their resources. So yeah, the vast majority, it's more, you know, now it may be presented in that way again, depending on
Mm.
what your tech
Yeah.
stack looks like. Um, but I mean, it's in my case, it's been very beneficial. If I'll consider myself kind of a Jedi master of Excel. I think again, a lot of people, again, and it's not vintage. I mean, it's just a tool that now kids, have in kindergarten versus something that like I actually remember being introduced to. Um, and so there's still a tremendous dependency,
Mm.
and there's a lot of work that goes into that. And obviously, what we're focused on is trying to improve the efficiency, the effectiveness, but also job satisfaction for folks, right? I mean, we really are trying to change that paradigm that we've been dealing with for 30 plus years. 80% of my people's time is on data acquisition, verification, reconciliation, and 20% is on analysis. Well, I come in every day and I'm trying to figure out how to flip that, right? I want my people to focus on the whys, not the whats.
Would you want AI to do that, the whys, or not really? Not yet. At least on the
Um,
data.
it really depends. It's fascinating what's out there, right? Because you know, it there's just this gap that, and I attribute it more to education, right? Because we've talked for a while, so these are some terms you've heard me say, but it's the Office of Finance is already working 30 hours a day, 10 days a week, 75 weeks a year. And the challenge is you're so much trying to get through the day, is
Mm.
how much time can you allocate to
Mm.
improving the situation? And that falls much more on the CFO, but that then comes down to communications, right? Because having gone, I started at a financial analyst many, many years ago and worked my way up, and understanding where those pain points are. And even though
Mm.
I may not feel them, right? So I'll ask a particular question, maybe, a data analytics question, right? And I get the answer, but kind of
Mm.
what you were alluding to, but I don't see how that's created anymore because that's not in I shouldn't be spending my time on that. But
Mm.
I need to hear from my treasurer. I need to hear from my controller. I need to hear from the folks that are involved with AP and AR. You know,
Mm.
when we do these things, are there better ways of doing it? And so I think there's just this chasm, for lack of a better term, between understanding what is possible with technology. Lever, it's never the solution; it's a tool, and where we can be. And so, I think so much can be. I mean, I'm pretty
Mm.
far out the curve. I'm someone who believes that so much can be, whether we want to call it AI'd away for
Mm.
lack of a better word, but it's finding that right combination between the humans and and the AI. And it's just I mean, I understand not everyone's going to make the journey, but I truly believe, that AI isn't going to replace people. People that use AI are going to replace people that don't use AI. It's just a
Mhm.
skill that you're just going to have. But the onus is
Mm.
so much now on finance to seek out that technology. Because what I've seen, one person's opinion, right, is that, IT is so busy with so many other things. The idea that, they have a solution to a problem they're not aware of, right? That's not where it's going to be
Mm.
driven from. It needs to be driven from, in my opinion, the Office of Finance is to go out and find what those, potential, technologies are. And we're hearing about them, but again, like you were saying, there's just this gap between, oh, you're talking about automation. And you're like, oh no, we're talking about agentic AI. You're like, oh, you mean like Gen AI? You know, no. So there's so much that can be done. So I think the potential is just incredible. I mean, again, uh, we could spend hours and hours talking about this. I mean, I truly think we're living in, whether you think about the industrial revolution or the digital revolution, the AI revolution, I think is just going to be as big. I think just fundamentally what we'll be doing in 5 years as our job, the activities, is going to be so different than what it is today.
Got it. So I agree with everything that you said, and I want to go back to this comment on saying you would want to basically inform strategy and review the metrics against strategy, or essentially like keep comparing, right? So this is what
Yep.
is happening today on all these functions, and this is the strategy, both existing and forward looking and all of that. So given that context, how often are you involved in, say, business model discussions, say with the CEO, identifying the pricing, identifying the target market? Is that does that take, let's say, some share of a CFO's time, or
Oh
not
yes.
really?
I mean, yeah, and again, because it's moving somewhat away from the business,
Hmm.
because we have the skills and the tools that they don't necessarily have. So, one of the things that I've been talking with, and obviously, the
Hmm.
elephant in the room is tariffs, right? Even, probably the biggest chuckle I got, in last 2 weeks ago, and it was in Brunei, was like,
Hmm.
sorry, kind of, on behalf of the United States, we apologize.
Hmm.
But this, but what's happened in an incredibly short period of time is understanding what the true cost and value of your customers are.
Hmm.
And so, to give you an example, if you take this is a company in Chicago, let's say they have 150,000 customers. Well, the old Pareto 80/20 rule will tell you, 20% of those customers are generating 80% of your profit. When we
Hmm.
actually got in there and looked at the data, leveraging machine learning, for example, it
Hmm.
comes out to be about 3,000 customers are generating 80% of the profit. 107,000 are producing that last 20,
Hmm.
and about 40,000 are unprofitable, right? So think about understanding that, and then adding in a situation where you have whatever the variable is. Today's
Yeah.
variable is tariffs,
Yeah.
right? So there's 3,000 customers. You do not want to necessarily pass the full cost of that tariff along, because
Yeah.
they're so valuable to you. But the 40,000 that aren't even profitable,
Hmm.
pass that along. Being able to give that insight to the business to
Hmm.
understand, it's so, again, it's understanding it. Yes, we look at rev, but then what's like, well, let's understand what the cost is, right? And at the
Hmm.
end of the day, what we really care about is the bottom line, is, is profit. And
Hmm.
so that is being, as our people become more trained,
Hmm.
as our technology improves, if um, the I think our processes, can always be improved, but it's just that cultural idea of all of a sudden bringing people, you know, what, I'd say data driven insights that they've just
Hmm.
never had before, at a speed that they've never had before, because we're now getting to the point, by again leveraging AI, for example, is that we can, get closer and closer to real time insight. So the business just has never had that before. So the idea that you now are, having the right product at the right place at the right price to the right customer, again, is coming from the analytics. So I would say the cadence of talking to other members in the C-suite,
Hmm.
is only increasing.
Hmm. Got it. And what? Okay. So two questions. One is, how much of the clerical work that goes into talking to the CXOs of the world, or even the investors and stakeholders, is actually owned by the CFO, or is that all also delegated? Like, let's say I have an investor update or a CXO update or CEO update coming in around a business model or whatever, a very very strategic thing. Do you end up making that report? Do you end up making those PowerPoints, or that it's more like you would have one favorite individual on the team whose role is to do that and work on these kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's topic driven, right? So if we're talking about, so, again, part of it is just size of organization, right? If you work for a very large organization, you get to have a bigger team, and that
Yeah,
makes life that much
yeah.
easier. So yeah, I mean, it depends on the level of specialization. So from a regulatory tax accounting perspective, yeah, that's coming from my leaders in those. When you get more to data analytics, that's more pulling the team together and having a function, because
Hmm.
I don't have a chief of data analytics.
Yeah.
Um, I that typically falls into FP&A, right?
Hmm.
So, and full disclosure, that's the path I came up with. So again,
Yeah.
I'd lean on that. I'd lean on that group more. I'm biased, but I think it's correct too. They're not mutually exclusive. You can be both. Um, but yeah, it's because they are able to bring to answer the questions, right? I'm in the role of asking the questions, anticipating the questions, understanding what the business, with the CEO, what my peers in the C-suite want to know. Um, but and so it's working with a very dedicated, what I would argue is a very brilliant team
Hmm.
that is leveraging you know data analytics, and obviously leveraging AI to be able to answer the questions that the business actually cares about. Because at the end of the day, we can do incredible analytics, but if there's no consumer for it,
Hmm.
it's kind of a waste of time. In all honesty, it becomes much more of an academic. So, what I try to do with my partners is understand, from a data perspective, what are three things that you would like to know today that you don't know,
Hmm.
that you think could
Hmm.
really impact the organization? And that's what I'm focused on, is can we
Okay.
get to that data? Um, I mean, and part of part of the challenge is, well, the data is in many, many different places.
Mhm.
Again, that's where agentic AI comes in, right? That agentic AI is fantastic, for pulling in information from very disparate sources. And so that action that we used to have, people doing,
Hmm.
that it's always the way I kind of look at it. It's like, what's the value of a monthly forecast that takes me 45 days to do? Right? And so it's getting that 45-day process down to 5, and I've got
Yeah.
to leverage my people, and I've got to leverage technology to get that, because again, the world's just moving too fast. And I'd say the other thing that's a little bit different, I mean, it falls into finance in
Hmm.
general, but if you take something like tax, if you take something like
Hmm.
accounting, they have to be right? You can't just be good at tax, you can't just be good at accounting. But right, it's binary. It's either right or it's wrong, and if you're wrong, you might go to jail. Whereas when you're talking about data analytics, right, you have to be good, because anytime we're talking about it's kind of the old, if you're familiar, the old George Box, right? All models are wrong. Some are
Hmm.
useful. All forecasts are wrong. And so it's understanding what's good, right? So and it's also a little bit, what we're trying to do is not be perfect, it's to be better, right? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if we are the best in our industry, that
Mhm.
doesn't mean you're perfect, that just means you're the best.
Hmm.
And so I think people are getting more comfortable with the idea that we don't have certainty, because I get that
Hmm.
all the time. Like, are you certain this is going to happen? And we're like, no. It's kind of like running again, if you have the luxury to do multiple scenarios, right? Well, this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen. It's being prepared for those things to happen,
Hmm.
having a response, which is very different than a reaction, having a response, having a plan, having that plan approved. So when things happen, regardless of the genesis of it, with the
Hmm.
actual cause, we care about the output, right? It's
Hmm.
like, why are sales down 20%? Again, we don't in finance, like, we're not going to spend a lot of time figuring out why. It's,
Hmm.
what do we do? That's where the value is. Yes, we need to understand, is it something that's controllable or not controllable? And at the end of the day, is it material or not material? I mean,
Hmm.
the times, and again, in my career where I've seen people spend an inordinate amount of time talking about variance that is not controllable and not material,
Hmm.
and or degrees of accuracy that don't really matter, right? And so the idea being, if what I need to know is, are we going to grow by
Hmm.
4%, and if it comes in at 3.75, we should understand, but not spend an incredible amount of time on that. It's like that's pretty good accuracy, if we're talking about a forecast. Whereas, again, comparing it to more compliance issues, right? It's like, well, we got most of the accounting right. We got most of the tax right. There's other entities that care about it. So if you can come up with a strategy, I'm a sports person. I think team
Hmm.
wise, right? If I can field that team, that can win, that's what I'm trying to do. Are they going to go pick a season, 20 game season? Are they going to go 20-0? Oh, no, there's no way they're going to go 20-0.
Hmm.
But, but if we go 15-5 and win the cup, that's what we're
Hmm.
trying to shoot for.
Got it. So if I take all of this together and if I look at kind of very, very specifics, right? So if we start looking at, hey, what are the documents that you look at daily? Where are they stored today? How do you actually generate the insights that you need? And actually, you've already talked about there's a team and a bunch of set of teams that may help you. But help me walk through, like we've talked about the task, you talked about what we need from the task, you talked about how technology can help them. Help me walk through what actually are these things, like what are these documents or what is this information, how does that work?
So, yeah, so, it is looking at, for the most part, what's our plan, what's our forecast, and the variance from that, from what
Hmm.
we expect. And so
Got it.
that's being generated by many different parts. So when we
Hmm.
talked about, liquidity and cash position, well, that's coming out of Treasury, right? So we have an idea of what we expect it to be. And I have Treasury background too, and I will tell you the cash forecast of the Treasury is my preference to the FP&A or the finances, because they're saying, and Treasury is, this is what it is. It's kind of, I'm a believer that should is a bad word, right? It's like, well, this is what
Hmm.
it should be. It's like, well, that's nice, but that's not what it is, right? And
Hmm.
so it's understanding why that's happening. Are
Hmm.
we at a burn rate that makes sense? And
Hmm.
we go, well, if we continue on this on this trend line, we're going to run into a
Hmm.
problem, or challenge. Let's put it that way. So, they're producing that. If I'm looking at, the data analytics teams, all of a sudden, if they start detecting trends, and that's what
Hmm.
the game is all about now, is can you detect trends earlier, or is it an anomaly? Oh, it just happened. Why did it happen? So it's much more spending time on, you know, certainly diagnostic and predictive analytics than descriptive, right? Is
Hmm.
we can't just spend our time looking backwards. Again, if
Hmm.
it's something that we can learn from, that's great, and let's go for it. But we're moving much more in a world of, what's happening today and
Hmm.
how can we improve what we're doing. And so it's coming from, you know all different parts. Some of it's truly coming from, our POS, so point of sales. Like, are we seeing,
Hmm.
something that's dropping off? But the fact that we can get that data much
Hmm.
quicker, even though it's coming from different sources, um, is becoming more and more critical. And we know, again, that we're just gonna, the opportunity, and that's what I see. I see tremendous opportunity
Hmm.
in developing, co-pilots
Hmm.
to really work with different parts of the organization to move off of the humans' plates things that aren't bringing a lot of
Hmm.
value add, and then really focusing on the human. And I think we see that across the board. Is like most, please correct me because you know this far better than I do.
Hmm.
Most activities, can be, let's say, 80%, you
Hmm.
know, automated away. But but the human is the 20%, and the human is probably that 20% is what's going to impact more of 80% of your profits,
Yeah.
and the other 80% that's just straight through.
Yeah.
So, everyone's dealing with different um, challenges from a data perspective.
Hmm.
And so there's no, I mean, it's trying to move to the single version of the truth. We've been working on this for, you know, 50, 60 years. And and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I think it's much more building a process that
Hmm.
can go to the multiple sites and bring multiple sources than trying to have a single repository that has all the information in the format that you want it, that you can use on a, that's readily accessible and quick.
So I agree actually. So the key technical challenge is gathering data. But in addition to that, there's also on the data side, there's a challenge which says, I don't know what data I need. So
Mhm.
discovery of data itself is a challenge. Assuming the AI or let's say systems or whatever is able to understand uh, what is the data, how does it need to come together, but finding that data is a challenge, and that's where all these new age AI is going to help because it can think or it can reason. And once you aggregate it, there's also this other challenge where, let's say, we don't have experts like you in the room, or we don't have this team of expert data analytics in the room. Then we want the system to give you insights. Then we want the systems to, like you said, so it cannot just sit and just give me a historical based recommendation. It should be, or it cannot just give me state of things as of today and alerts. It needs to be able to prescribe or even do a forward looking alert saying, hey, this may be happening. It actually should be able to not only give me the next step or the next to next step also, right? So it's all essentially all different kinds of forecasting models, but still sitting in the fuzzy space because I may not have all the data to put it, I mean, to fit it nicely into actual statistical forecast model.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think that's data is the challenge. How do you, what do you make out of the data is higher, it's even more a challenge. So
Mhm.
um, do you use any AI tools today,
Yeah.
and what do you use them for?
Sure, sure. So, I mean, certainly use Gen AI. Again, and using it for, I would say automating kind of routine tasks and that first level of generating
Hmm.
insights, exactly what you're talking about, and improving, financial, forecasting. So we are trying to leverage that, understanding, the limitations, that we have, but also using Copilot. So, looking
Hmm.
at, tools that can streamline, process and enhance. And again, what's it going to come at the end of the day? The business doesn't care about our processes. The business cares about
Yeah.
our insights, right? But you have to have the tools in place, that streamlines the process so that you can get to the insights. Leveraging more data analytic tools. I mean, the idea, because I think where you can start getting to that
Hmm.
single version of the truth is if you can view your data in the most granular form. So if you have the ability, even if it's billions, I mean, again, and that's what's changed, right? We can talk about billions of transactions
Hmm.
is beyond the ability of, humans with Excel files trying to figure anything out, right?
Hmm.
But AI can. So, being able to identify who are my most profitable customers, you know, when I'm looking at, is, or because again, it's revenue is easy to
Hmm.
review, right? And so we have a tendency to focus more, and costs are harder, right? And then the net result is profitability, right? But the idea that if we can look at our data in the most granular form, so let's say, from shipping overseas to, the transportation costs to, production costs to marketing costs, again, it's just been so overwhelming that, again, and part of it is, yeah, you can do all that analysis and it takes 8 months, right? So how does it help you make a decision? Well, it doesn't. So again, that's what's kind of changing. We're seeing it in risk management.
Hmm.
and then just I would say straight, kind of AI driven automation, right? Like data
Mm,
entry and reconciliation, and potentially, again, as you were alluding to before, depending on what the model is,
mm,
running the model itself, there's not a lot of human value to that. So let's go ahead. It's the interpreting, it's the thinking about it. So, you know, the goal, you sit there and say, why are you using these tools and why are you
mm.
spending money to buy these tools and upskilling our people? It's like, well, we're trying to get smarter forecasts. We're trying to get better strategic planning. We're trying to optimize our processes. We want stronger reporting. I mean, I mean, unless you're sitting on just tons and tons of cash. I mean, working capital management is what we spend a lot of our time in. And then certainly there's always, the ability, that, from an audit and compliance perspective, it's always leveraging, it's a lot easier to have and I've done this in the past, is just have a bot, out there just scraping the internet for anything
Mm,
related, from a tax perspective, if you're working in multiple countries, regulation changes that are coming down. And again, we're just in a period where there's just a lot of moving parts, and it's hard to have people look at, it's like, well, that's the big thing about with tariffs right now. And that's where, obviously a lot of people are spending their time, is like, well, what is this impact? Because you're coming
yeah.
up with these incredible, well, does it make, now you're getting the situation where, let's just take, like, if I need trucks, for example, well, does it make
Mm,
more sense to buy a truck in the United States that the tariffs on the materials might be higher than a foreign built truck, and just bring it in and have its, tariff? I mean, that's just a lot of analysis that has to be done. And so, when we kind of think about, what are the kind of the takeaways of the features that we're looking at, well, we're looking at, automation, we're looking at augmentation, right?
yeah.
Acceleration, getting much closer to those real-time data analytics. Again, there's always risk management, but also collaboration, right?
Mm,
The more real-time data information insights that we have to share, or I have to share with other members in the C-suite, just increases that level of collaboration that it
mhm.
takes to really thrive, right? Because at the end of the day, finance is a support function, right? We don't run a P&L, we're not producing the product, but our goal is really from that finance business partnering component. How can we share with our partners, you know insights, not just certainly not just data and not just information, but actually insights, actionable information that can help them make better, faster, smarter decisions at the end of the day. And to the extent that we can, it's not a matter of how do we get a seat at the table. It's almost gets to the point of how do we, once they understand what we can do for them, is then saying,
Yeah.
well, we can't do everything for you, so you still have to prioritize, right? I mean, we've had that challenge where, they find out we can do all this analysis, and then they're like, okay, great, well, here's the 100 things that we want. You go, okay, but I still can't do 100 things at the same time. So it's great that you understand what we can do for you, but you still have to, prioritize. So, when we think about, you know what we're really looking for, again, some of this is a little repetitive, but, data analytics and reporting and financial processes, making cash management more effective. But then, you're kind of getting things like, like autonomous, AP, for example, right?
Mm,
Is, we're, implementing, systems to, we want to process our invoices faster. We want to improve
mm,
the decision making, because again, it's the idea of there's all this data that's out there,
mm,
and it, again, the technology has changed. So people are just as smart, right? It's
mm.
that we're finally, from my perspective, my career, right? We're finally have the technology that can let us do a lot of things that we've never been able to do before, and it will take us to a better place. I mean, there's always going to be fear. Humans hate change, right? But we can, get to a better place. I think where there has been a challenge, again, from an educational perspective, is one is this I think there's an overhype in what AI can do, and at the same time, to be honest, there's a little bit, I'll just say it's in the ether, of a little bit of too much joy of that, oh, we're going to replace all the people, right? And so it creates a little bit of an environment of people don't want to push for AI if they fear AI. Whereas if you sit there and say, no, it's, if you really can say one plus one is going to be three, but again, and again, this is getting kind of, I always talk about finance being half calculus and half psychology because we deal with people, but it's a little bit of the fear that people just have that, their jobs are going to go away. And like I said, if you read the media, so let's throw it at the media, there's a little too much, I guess the word I was looking for is glee in the
Hmm.
idea of like, oh, we can get rid of all these people. And you're like, okay, that's not that, you're over promising what it can do, right? So then it makes you think you can get rid of your people. It's kind of like the idea of whether you want to think that, like, we're going to bring in, at the time, desktop computers, and we'll get rid of all the people. Oh, and we'll get rid of all the paper too, right? It's people they don't understand what it really takes to get things done. So I think, again, hopefully, formats like this where we can, talk to the audience and say,
Yeah.
you know, all these things, it is, it is moving us to a better world. I wish I were coming out of university right now into this world and saying how we can leverage technology to actually do a lot of the things that, again, I just shouldn't be spending my time on doing. So I don't know if if I went a little off the rails there, I apologize, but
No, that's
that's what I'm
fine.
seeing.
That's fine. And I like the way you see it. You talked about desktop, right? So similarly, I think
Yeah,
email was introduced at some point in time. All of us use them. I mean, a version of email now.
yeah.
We have started moving to other modes of communication, be it instant messaging or whatever, Slack or Teams and all of that. But emails exist, right? We're not replacing people. People have to still send emails.
Yeah.
But let's say I started. I told you there was this AI powered workspace for a CFO, and that you could look at every morning. So instead of your desktop, or instead of, I'm guessing, your mailbox,
Mhm.
email box, you look at this fancy thing.
I was going to say what I
On
really
your
want to do is look at this, right? Right.
Yeah. So let's say that thing was on your phone, or on your
Yeah,
device.
that's what yeah, I want it mobile. Mhm.
What are the features and the functionalities would you like to have there as a finance leader beyond everything else that exists in the
Yeah,
world?
the ability to ask what if, right,
Got it.
is the ability. So even with, the problem is a lot of the communication we have is
Hmm.
very static, right?
Hmm.
And what I want is dynamic, right?
Hmm.
Is the idea, well, what if this happens or what if this happens?
Hmm.
And, really getting into what I call, being able to do, I guess, again, if I get my whiteboard, it would be, would be on the fly, data driven decision making, right? Or
Hmm.
data driven decision making. And so it's the idea that, okay, well, if we change these prices, what's that impact going to be? What's given the elasticity of of the price? Again, coming up with this broad a forecast, or a better would be a model,
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
model that gives me the ability in a very user friendly form to ask the model questions, right? That I don't, because not every question not every answer to every question is actually going to drive a decision.
Hmm.
And so the idea being trying to move away from having humans answer those
Hmm.
questions, because that's where it's still at the end of the day, 90% of, of where these questions are going to get answered. I'm going to ask someone a question. And the idea that I could have a tool that would give me at least a good idea. And if
Mhm.
it's and if it seems like that's something that bears greater um, investigation, then having
Mhm.
my people do that. So, one of the things that, again, I learned in career is like, whomever my boss has been, until they ask me three times, I don't jump on it. Right? Is
Hmm.
because if I jump on everything that everyone asks me, I don't do anything all day. And it's like, kind of, and that, like, obviously I'm just having a little bit of fun there. But the idea being is, oh, if you ask me three times, you actually care about this, right?
Yeah.
Because, and again, without sounding pretentious, I mean, when you get up in the C-suite, it's a lot more, strategic and visionary than tactical. So it's like, hey, what would happen if we did X? And you're like, okay, that's going to take me a long time to figure out. And again, you kind of you think about it, but if I could run that myself, right, and at least give me some idea if it makes any sense, then,
Hmm.
if it quickly it comes back and goes, well, that economic, there's no profitability there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a little bit, so one of the things that we've dug out of, again, getting into data analytics, is understanding what our business really is and not what we perceive it to be.
Hmm.
So, you know, again, talking about a company, that I've worked with, let's say we produce a product, whatever the product may be, but we produce it in 800 colors, right? Well,
Hmm.
when we actually look at the analytics, we find out maybe 53 colors actually generate 80% of the volume. But one of the things we actually use this as a case study. We call it the fuchsia case.
Hmm.
And the reason being is that for every product this particular company ever produced, it
Hmm.
never made money when
Hmm.
anything that was in fuchsia. But if I don't have that empirical evidence, when I go
Hmm.
to sales and marketing, they say, "Oh, no, 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 we've got to have it in fuchsia. That's what people want." We've got studies that saying that's what people want, and and again, they're not taking anything away from their expertise. But if I can come back to them and go, "We've never made money in it," that's the power that we want to have. And so to have that as close to my smartphone as possible, to be able to understand that, because there's that perception, especially when you get into revenue, right? Is that people think broadly, like, you know, their
Hmm.
customers who provide the most revenue are their most important customers. And you may find out actually, no, they're terribly unprofitable for us. And being able to have that. So it's just being able to get to certainly the data and certainly information, but then can I figure out how quickly can I get those insights? So again, to the degree that and then again, as we've improved the processes by using other
Hmm.
technologies, when I have those questions that are really valuable, then going to my people and saying, spend time on that. And they go, oh, you know what? We do have the time to do it because we're not doing these other activities that have to be done. And I think that's really where I haven't quite figured it out for AI yet, but
Hmm.
my little term that I would use is that automation equals liberation. So maybe it's still applicable, but it's just the idea that we have people spending too much time doing activities that have very low ROI. And I think, again, we just want to free our folks up. And I think, again, it's a win for the company. It's a win for the people. Most of the people we hire are really, really smart people, and they really want to do really, really interesting work and use really interesting tools. And so, I mean, that's where, people are worried about, oh, wait, if they don't learn Excel, could they ever be a great leader? And again, dating myself, it's kind of like, when we started letting kids use calculators on tests, they didn't stop learning, right? I'm of an age where like no, you couldn't have a calculator on an exam. So but it's a tool, right? The calculator doesn't solve the problem for you, right? It just gets you the information faster. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's what I'm looking at is kind of, so I'm very much a make sure I say it right, a technophile, right? So I love technology, but not because it's going to reduce headcount. It's because it's going to let me use my people to do much better work, much more valuable work, and at the end of the day, you know, benefit the company by being able to do it.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And you've talked about Excel. So this this morning, in fact, I was trying to make an Excel sheet to explain something to an individual. These were numbers. I am a computer scientist and an AI individual, and I was trying to do that on an Excel sheet rather than writing a Python file. It
Yeah.
took me forever, and like the first thing in my head was, we need an AI agent to do this. So it's like I want AI to take away all of that for me. So in as a CFO or as a finance leader, what was an instance in the last couple of weeks where you thought I need AI to do this? Um,
Oh, on a model, a pricing model,
Got it.
because
Yeah.
yeah, it's really on that project work because it's there's so many variables that come into play that I don't have access to. right?
Yeah.
And so what happens is, I can't even use assumptions. They're all I'm just estimating everything, right? Is the
Mm,
idea. If I actually had a tool that could go and
mm,
go, oh, go find the pricing schedule for all of this, go find the
mm,
transportation cost.
mm,
If not, it's me kind of, again, doing an Excel and make it probably, I think I'm good at Excel, coming up with a good model, but it kind of at the end of the day goes to what you're talking. It's all about the data. And if I can't get to the
mm,
data, then I'm estimating everything. And so, being off a
mm.
few percentage is critical in this environment. Like we just don't, and so it's really being able to address, I put it in two buckets. One is the process. Like there's this processes we know that we can do better. You know, the way I look at the world is it's a pre and a post pandemic world. And I spent a lot of time talking about RPA and what it could do.
Mm,
But, now I describe it this way. So it's always dangerous when a finance person knows a little bit about technology. But I kind of like consider agentic AI as, thinking RPA. I don't know
mm,
if that rings true to you, but that's how I try to explain it to people. And then understanding that's internal, that does not have, always correcting me, that doesn't have the risk characteristics that Gen AI has, and you're going out and creating, um,
mm.
um, uh, I guess, analysis, right? Is that I see it as more closed and safer. In all honesty, is how I view it. And again, if it's, I reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow than today, and you're certainly the person who could help me with that. But it's understanding, you know, that it's not just like I said, and it kind of goes back to what we are talking about, is understanding that, RPA does a process, but it doesn't think, right? And Gen AI is great, but it's going out there and creating content,
Mm,
right?
mm,
That's what generative means. What we're trying to get to on this third point, where we're getting to agentic, is basically getting the technology. I call it a bot in my head, but getting the bot that actually thinks and questions, right? Because all of a sudden, well, this doesn't make sense. Why is this? And again, we can go into like all the the fantastic I share with people. It's like, if I work for you and I don't understand something and you explain it to me, then I learn, right? But if
yeah.
but if we're using agentic and it doesn't understand and you explain it to it, then the entire system now learns. And so just the power of that. um, so yeah, again, I'm very optimistic, but realistic, right? Is understanding that, and I understand where the uptake. I don't know if this has been your experience also, but the uptake in AI has been much greater in marketing. It's been much
Yeah.
greater in sales. Again, it's because I think as fiscal agents for the organization, we tend not to be risk takers, but also because the consequences are certainly perceived as higher. And it's just, getting people comfortable with the concept. And it goes literally back to what we were talking about. What's the art of the possible and how secure is this?
Got it. I think on that note, let's maybe just close. Thanks for all the inputs, but the one takeaway I have is essentially your dream AI agent want is the one that'll think and ask why.
Yep.
So thanks for that, and looking forward to more conversations. Have a
Wonderful.
nice day. Yeah.
Be well.
Bye.